And Steve said, well, okay, but I'm sort of insecure. I'm not doing it without a textbook, so give me 6 months and I'll write a textbook. And he wrote the 4 Steps to the Epiphany that for the first time sort of outlined this whole concept of customer development that we're going to talk about. And if you look at the Amazon reviews of 4 Steps to the Epiphany, it says, wow, there's some fabulous, wonderful stuff in here. Why do I have to swim through this ocean of turds to find it? It's hard to read, badly laid out. He did it on, Microsoft Word and so forth. And hopefully we've come a long way from there. And of all my startups, obviously my proudest is my daughter who got her PhD just a few months ago in psychology, and made me a grandpa just about 2 years ago. But of all the experience I've had, the thing that gives me the most credentials, if you will, to be standing up here today is these 3 fleece vests that I own. I'm sure you all have one. It's got these each have a nice colorful company logo on the front. And on the back, remember when you were a kid and mom and dad went to Europe and you came home and you got a t-shirt that said something like, Mommy and Daddy went to Paris, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. My 3 vests embroidered on the back said, I invested $1 million of my own cash in this company, and all I got was this lousy fleece vest. And I believe the etymologists in the room would trace the origin of the word fleece to that saying rather than to the alpacas and so forth. And so between us, Steve and I have done 15 startups over a combined, not individual, 75 years in this insane, crazy world. And we like to tell ourselves that we've made at least 500 stupid startup mistakes, and we tried to capture them all and put them in the book so you don't, have to make them. So just quickly, how many engineers in the room? Okay, everybody, pay attention. You need these people on your teams. Go hug them, cuddle them at the coffee break. How many marketeers? Okay, if you're an engineer, look at them, right? Anybody on their 3rd or more startup? 1? Okay, you're certifiable. The nurse is out waiting for you, but welcome to the nut house. And I guess many of you have a day job at NYU, so we'll skip that question. And the way I think about startups is you're not just signing up for all the craziness of this program through April. If you're passionate about pushing forward with a startup, you're making a 20,000-hour investment. That's 5 years of 80-hour weeks at great expense to your relationships with your family, boyfriend, girlfriend. Your dog won't even remember you. And right? And that's if you're lucky and it goes well. Most of us are going to do 2 or 3 before sparks start to fly. And we're going to talk more about pivots and things like that later on. But you're certainly, the idea you are sitting in this room with today is almost certainly not going to resemble what you're standing up here and pitching in next April. And if it does, you're either Mark Zuckerberg or delusional, which may both actually fit, in the same body. And the sort of, the new rule that's emerging in the Valley is that every startup team needs 3 founders: a hacker, a hustler, and an artiste, right? Somebody who's heads down developing, somebody who's heads up out of the office talking to customers, that'd be the hustler, and the artiste is doing the user interface between the product and the customer. And if you think about it, as you're forming your teams for this or for any startup, you desperately need to have the hacker here and the hustler here, and every day or every 2 or 3 days you face one another and the hustler says, here's what I've learned and what I think we need to build based on what I've learned, and the hacker says, well, I can do that, I'll have to drop this, and so on and so forth. And then they both about face, and the hacker puts his or her head back down, starts coding, developing, sculpting, building, whatever, And the hustler gets back out to revalidate the feedback he or she just brought to this sort of face-to-face meeting. And that is probably the simplest, most inelegant, but terse summary of the customer development process that we're going to sort of explore today. So this picture is the 1908, the first MBA graduating class at Harvard. You will notice there's not a woman, there's not a minority of any stripe in that group. In fact, they probably are virtually all white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And in 1908, Harvard realized that there were these big sort of corporations emerging, and it was time to start to create a body of knowledge for managing those corporations, you know, corporate finance, accounting, you know, marketing, all those silly things that corporations do. And so they created the MBA program, issued the first MBA, and from 1908 to about the year 2000, we applied exactly the same rules to startups that were drilled into the heads of all the MBAs running hedge funds and venture funds and things like that, because it was the only body of knowledge we had. And at the time, we believed there was really one kind of startup. It was a startup built to scale, and there was one type of entrepreneur, a crazy entrepreneur who would be passionate and driven and would drive people to work their buns off, and would almost certainly have to be fired if the company started to be successful, because who would want that wacky person running a company that might actually return some money to the investors? But what we know today is there are lots of different kinds of startups, right? The ones you're here, most of you, are focused on building a scalable startup, a business that's going to grow to epic proportions, that's going to be worth many millions of dollars, have many thousands of customers, and so forth. But you have to start on day one. You have no idea who your customers are, and you have no idea what they want. But when you see a business that's on track to potentially grow to plus or minus $100 million in revenue in a market that's, say, $500 million or thereabouts in size, you can probably at that point begin to raise some, you know, serious capital. But there are lots of other types of startups, right? Think of the number of surfers who, when the waves are really good, they're out surfing, and then when the waves aren't so good, they have a sign, surfing lessons, $25. Or skiers, or people who are doing something that is their passion, or artists, or designers, or painters. It's their passion. Maybe it's a business. It's, at best, it's going to feed their family and keep gas in their 20-year-old, you know, VW camper or whatever. Then there are lots of smaller business startups. I love to tell the story of the guy in Stamford, Connecticut, named Al Iglesias. Al Iglesias lost his job at the Clairol factory in Stamford when it shut down, and is a very competent, you know, able guy. And he said, okay, I'm going to start my own business. I'm not going to go get another job at another factory. I think I'm ready. Al Iglesias bought a bunch of trucks, a bunch of lawnmowers, a bunch of equipment, and he has a huge lawn care business. It'll never have an exit. It'll never have an IPO, but it's going to put his kids through college. It's going to let him go back to the Dominican Republic for a couple of weeks every winter to see his family. And he is every bit the entrepreneur that you and I are. Took risk. He's always, you know, expanding his lines of business by hiring more people, by adding new equipment, taking training, like he now does all the chemicals and stuff like that, which is an incredibly complicated licensing process. It's a small business designed more to feed the family. It's probably never going to break the $500,000 revenue mark, and he'll be incredibly lucky if he can ultimately sell it perhaps to a couple of his employees over time. Not financeable. It's only financeable to the extent he has equity in his home or a wealthy uncle or something like that, because it's a personal services business sort of at the end of the day. Do we have any social entrepreneurs in the room who are thinking more about doing something that is great and with no view to profitability? I saw one hand go up over there. 2, good for you. 3, great. Much of what you're going to hear today is as applicable to social entrepreneurship as it is to for-profit, scalable entrepreneurship. Right? Guy by the name of Scott Case is the CEO of Startup America. And very early in his young life, he checked the make more money than God box on his bucket list because he was the second CTO of Priceline, replacing the CEO's wife, who was just sick of, all the aggravation. So having checked that box, Scott said, all right, I got to do something interesting. What am I going to do? And he started an organization called Stop Malaria Now. The mission of Stop Malaria Now was very simple. Raise, private and public contributions and grants and stuff, and try to drive down the cost of putting a mosquito net over a child or an adult in sub-Saharan Africa. And he got the cost per net down to 46 or 47 cents, using essentially the same principles about how do I improve my channel, how do I improve my customer acquisition, how do I improve my distribution economics, everything other than he said, I don't care about the profit line, I care about the sustainability, and my measure of success is how many nets do I put over people, all over Africa. Not venture backable, except sort of going through the social responsibility door and so forth. And then the other class of startups, which some of you may find interesting, is what we've come to call the buyable startup. I think Google bought 75, I think it was, companies last year, and Facebook bought about the same number. If you can get something going and get some traction, and in 2 or 3 years, sell it to one of the monsters for $5 or $10 or $15 million, it can be a very exciting return for you and a very exciting return for your investors. Okay, and the important thing here is not so much which category am I in, but making sure that you and your fellow founding team members, and particularly importantly your investors, know, oh, by the way, our plan is not to make any money. Oh, by the way, our plan is not to go public. Whatever, understand from the outset where you're trying to go, because if you don't know the sort of target, it's pretty hard to hit it. So I was talking about, the cold pizza and so forth, and this is the way, really, until the turn of the 21st century, everybody assumed startups were built. They were built out of chaos and dumb luck and cold pizza and so forth. And they are all based on the vision of some wacky entrepreneur. And what we, I think, now know is that those visions are almost always extraordinarily blurry on day one. And we also, since we learned it at, in business school, we believe basically, well, a startup is the same thing as a big company, right? It's got G&A, it's got overhead, it's got marketing costs, it's got rent and revenue and all that good stuff. It's just all those numbers are so much smaller than they are in a big company, so let's manage them exactly the same way. And if you think about the early days of a startup and you're sitting with your investors and they say, well, gee, what's the revenue look like for October? 0. What about November? 0. What about December? 0. Oh, but the formatting of the spreadsheet is just the way we learned it in business school, so terrific, good job on all those zeros, right? What's the payroll? Well, it's the same as last month. We're not hiring anybody till we get some revenue. What's the rent? Well, gee, it only changes every 3 years. And the focus of your team and your board has to be about metrics that are much more important to your business than financial metrics, because the financial metrics are sort of meaningless and sort of a pig pen in the early days, and the only financial metric that matters in the early days is how much money do we have in the bank, how many more months of oxygen do we have before we have to shut the doors and sell off the furniture for 5 cents on the dollar to the used furniture guys. The other fundamental flaw in the way Harvard, taught, and every other business school certainly, including Stern, taught startup people was, well, companies, are all about execution. What's your quarterly plan? What's your to-do list? What's supposed to happen? What are the numbers going to look like? How many customers you're going to have in February of 2013. And if you think about, the way successful companies run, it's Six Sigma, black belt, execution. Never put up a plan I can't be sure to hit and beat, because it would not be kind of good for my career. But the reality is that a startup has no idea what it's going to execute on the first day. On the first day as a startup, you're starting to figure out whether your guesses about is this a business or isn't it a business, are they fairy tales or reality? And you spend the first months, if not year or more, in your startup on a search to see if you have a business model. And so we think that this does not begin really with a business plan at all, which is the way you were all taught, those of you who went to business school in the last century, and in many cases still today, right? Step one in founding your startup is write a 45-page business plan in 12-point Helvetica with colored headlines and nice footers and headers, and this 8-page set of fabulous Excel spreadsheets that somehow always get you to $100 million in revenue and profitability in 3 or 4 years. And we believe that business plans really belong in a different building at Stern and every other university on the land. They belong over in the creative writing department, because it's all fiction. How could you possibly look me in the eye and tell me how many customers your startup is going to have next February, or how much revenue, or how many repeat orders? It's all, cow dung, right? You're making it up to make the point with an investor that they should write a check for you. And then when the investor says, okay, here's $500,000, $250,000, $5 million, you say, oh my God, we really hit it. These investors, look at how many successes they've had, and they're saying our business plan is right. Yahoo! It's like going public, right? But all it really is that investor's going to invest in 30, 40, 50 companies in the life of his or her fund, and there's no validation. The validation is, well, we think these guys, good team, maybe an interesting idea. They got as much of a shot as any of the other 40 in our fund. And we know that we're going to bury 30, 35 of them, and 1 or 2 are going to go to the moon and hide all those sins, and another couple are going to return a little bit of money. And so why waste all that time writing Grimm's fairy tales forecasts that you have no idea, you don't even know what you're selling yet if you're a good, diligent entrepreneur? So why would you, when somebody says, okay, go out and execute something just because it says in the plan that in January you're going to add these 3 features and you're going to have this special promotion and you're going to do a press party and everybody's going to show up and Walt Mossberg's going to rave about your product and so on and so forth. But in reality, those business plans, there's one real problem with the business plan. Let's say you're making a new exotic canned peas, or take-home dinner, or a great new piece of software sold on a CD, which actually would be saleable to a museum, I guess, these days. But you can't staple your business plan to every copy of your product, so the customer can turn to page 3 and have it say, 2 out of 3 people who come across this product are going to buy it, and they're going to repeat purchase in 4 months, and they're going to buy 4 at Christmas time to give to their friends and relatives, right? So the customers have no idea what they're supposed to do. And where customer development's foundational premise is, on the same day you shake hands with your founding team and start thinking about what your product is going to be, you split that team in half. Half of it works on the product, and half of it gets out of the building and starts to try to figure out who those customers are, what their problems are, how your product might solve them or might not, what features they want, where do they want to buy it, and all the things that the business model covers. And so figuring all of this out before you start, right? Remember, you're going on this 20,000-hour journey. If you're going on a 20,000-hour journey, wouldn't it be a good idea to spend 1,000 hours, maybe 2,000 hours? That'd be 10% of your total journey time. Making sure you have a pretty good roadmap and you have a sense that at the end of this 20,000-hour journey, there's like a bag of gold sitting there with your initials on it. So start from day one to make sure that anybody at all out there in the world, beyond your aunts and uncles and friends, gives a crap about the problem you're going to spend 5 years of your life solving and thinks your solution might have a prayer of solving that problem for them. So it sort of starts with, what's the definition of a startup? The slide I just skipped over said, interrupt me anytime, and I think we'll apply that rule in about a half hour or so. I want to sort of put down some basics, and then I'd almost rather integrate some of the Q&A time in case I'm leading you astray or raising questions or whatever. But a startup isn't really a company. A startup is a band of, passionate, wacky people who come together to go on a search to see if they can find a business model that makes sense. But it's a temporary organization. Its job is to put itself out of business, to get out of the search business by saying, Eureka, we have found a business model that sure seems to work. So now, only now, usually 6 months, a year, 2 years from today, you say, wow, congratulations, we are done searching, at least for now. Time to switch to execute mode. Now we know that for every 10 sales calls we make, we have a pretty good shot at getting 3 orders. And we know that the way to find our customers is to hang out in Washington Square Park with a t-shirt that says, buy this great thing from me. And for every 10 people who walk by, somebody stops and talks to me, and so on and so forth. And the customer development process challenges you to figure out sort of all of the elements that hang together to make your business a business. And it starts with the fact that you have no idea, by definition, who your customers are on day one, because you don't have any on day one. So how could you possibly write this 15-page plan for me, telling me, your customers want this, they're going to buy it here, they're going to pay that for it, they're going to come back every 3 months and buy more, they're going to tell their friends and sell them? Those are all your guesses about what's going to happen. So most startups fail really built around those two guesses, the assumption that I know the problem I'm solving for customers and that I know exactly what to put into my product or service to solve that problem. And this, right out of a page in the Harvard Business School curriculum back almost over 100 years, and in the curricula of business schools throughout the land, startups were built on a rigorous lockstep plan, all targeted to first customer ship. We are going to launch on April 2nd, 2013. Big party, balloons, press. We're going to be on sale in all kinds of stores, and so on and so on and so on. But that's in the business plan you wrote, 3, 6 months, 18 months ago. But everything backs up from that point, right? That means we got to have, a beta test by here. We've got to be building the product over here. We have to get some money over here, and we have to hire a VP sales here, and so forth. The problem is, if you are on this very tight execution-oriented timetable, you go out over here and talk to some customers, and they say, gee, that's not interesting at all to me. I've been solving that on, Google Docs, for years. who needs a product that does that anyway? Or, you know, there are 5 competitors of yours that you don't seem to even be aware of, and I don't know why the world needs a 6th company to process expense accounts or accounts payable or this or that or the other thing. And if you learn that somewhere over here, and you go in, knock on the door of the head of development and say, listen, we have a problem. We need to drop all these features and add all these features. The head of development says, can't do it. Sorry, I got to hit this date. I've got all my Gantt charts and flow charts and work all mapped out. I don't care if the customers don't want to buy it. We told the investors we were going to do this, and they're going to yell at us really bad at the board meeting if we stop doing what, you know, we told them we were going to do. And many companies fall into this terrible trap of execution before they really have a sense of what they're executing. And in reality, putting all that stuff in a business plan early in your life is a ridiculous sort of set of fairy tales. And so Steve and I met Alex Osterwalder about 2.5, 3 years ago, and absolutely fell in love with his business model canvas approach to thinking about a company. And I'm not going to walk in detail through every one of these boxes. There is a free online lecture at Udacity, UDACITY.com, about 20 minutes of detail on each of these boxes and what they mean. But if you look at it, you put all this together, you have essentially the picture of what makes a company, right? What's my value proposition? What is the contract I'm going to offer to a customer? Buy my product, use my social network, and it will do this for you, right? Who's the customer? The customer segment's over on the right. And relationships, how are they going to find you, learn about you, buy from you, stay with you, refer you to others, things like that. And if you think about this canvas, it really splits in half. The right-hand side, the sort of the magic sort of 4 boxes on the upper right, are the key elements of what we've come to call product market fit, which is actually a term coined by Mark Andreessen, legendary VC in the Valley, also founded a small company called Netscape, which was the first IPO in history for a company to go public when it was still losing gobs of money, and it went public not on its P&L, but on its staggering revenue growth. It was the first internet browser back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and Steve and Bob were young. And anyway, product market fit is, I have this contract, you know, Madam Customer, if you buy my product, it's going to make you lose weight, fall in love, improve your business, your future business opportunities, get you a better job, whatever. And who is the exact narrowest definition of the customer who's going to want that? So it's, in that case, a female executive looking to advance her career. So I make my value proposition or contract offer to that person. He or she says, okay, I'm in. That is the definition of product market fit. I'm solving a problem that's really important to customers, and I know which customers find it the most important. And if you have that, you have the beginnings of, we call it startup karma. And so when you take your break at lunchtime to work on your canvas, I want you to ignore the boxes on the left entirely, because you can't really get there that fast, and they, generally speaking, tend to come later. But if you don't know exactly who not all of your customers are, who are the customers that most urgently, desperately need your product, right? The narrowest, tightest definition of customer segment, because you want to start with the people who are the most excited about your product, for a couple of reasons. One, they're most likely to buy. Two, they'll probably take it if it's imperfect. Imagine if you have some new piece of accounts payable software that can take a pile of invoices like this and have them all paid by lunchtime and allocated to the right account and so on and so forth, and paid as slow as you can possibly get away with it as the payer. And you walk into a finance person's office and you see that stack of invoices. That is your white-hot core customer segment, and we call that your early evangelist. This is somebody who will take your product knowing that it's imperfect, knowing that it's an early version, because they are so desperate to move that pile of paper that they'll try anything. And the second thing they'll do is they'll give you feedback. Gee, it would work a lot better if this button were over here, or if you could also add post to general ledger, or if you could also add electronic bill pay, or whatever. They're going to coach you on making the product better because your product solves such a vital pain for them. So that's sort of the brief thought about customer segments. And the other side of that equation is the value proposition. What is it that I'm offering you? What is my promise or my contract to you, my customer? Buy this and you will blank. And too many startups, probably, I wrote a post a week or two ago called Why So Many Startups Suck. It has gone all over the world in about 20 or 30 languages, been in the Atlantic and Huffington Post and God knows where else. Most startups suck because they accept, oh, that's a nice product, or gee, that's interesting, yeah, I'd think about buying that, or yeah, maybe that looks pretty cool. And they march forward based on that kind of feedback. The kind of feedback you need is almost the customer jumping across the table and saying, I don't care if it doesn't work right yet. I don't care if it's not done. I want it right now. Can I have it now? Here's my money. I don't care what it costs. That's the kind of, customer feedback that it's worth putting your head down and spending 5 years of your life prosecuting. Give you one quick example of that. We sadly can only work with startups in groups, mostly because they don't, have money, and there's one number would suggest that there are about 350,000 startups founded a year in the United States alone. So you can imagine what the competition is to be in the 50 that are going to go public 5 years from now, right? That's pretty daunting odds, right? 350,000 to 50. Some math brain in here can figure out what that is on a 2-1 basis. But don't you want to start with a great idea? Don't you want to start with people saying, holy crap, you got a piece of software that can do that? I want it right now. So we have a very small consulting practice because we spend all our time doing things like this that generally either don't pay or pay car fare, and we love it, and it's incredibly fun, satisfying, and but our biggest consulting client has been a small company called General Electric, right? Number 3 on the global Fortune 1000, and General Electric launched what you could only describe as a startup. 18 people in a small rundown building in Schenectady, New York, with some technology to make a different kind of industrial battery. And they contacted us because they had no idea who their customers were. They had this technology. They had to sort of sort it out. They originally thought distributors would sell it, and the distributors weren't really all that interested. And they said, oops, we got to sell this direct to end users. Who are they? How do we reach them? Let's go talk to Steve and Bob. And they were every bit a startup with one minor exception. They had $100 million of seed capital, and the CEO, or in GE case, he's called the general manager, was told in no uncertain terms by Jeff Immelt, the CEO of GE, I need $1 billion of revenue in 2016, or you, my friend, are toast. Okay? Other than that, it was, 18 people, small, gritty offices, some very rough technology, and they go out and they start doing customer discovery, and we were pushing them hard. They thought this battery was particularly good in backup for cell phone towers and UPS systems. We started pushing them. You got to talk to more markets. You got to understand where the excitement is, where the real passion is. And they made a call on an architect in Philadelphia. Showed him a little bit about the product, talked about the problem, talked about the product benefits, and the architect said to him, I don't care what it costs. I just need to know I can have 60 of them on May 2nd. If you can deliver me 60 of them on May 2nd, I'll sign a purchase order right now. You can fill in the price later. Because the biggest, or one of the many features of this battery was it's a lot lighter weight than the batteries that usually power backup systems and big computer systems, which are just like your car batteries, which, as you probably realize, weigh quite a bit. And if you stack them 8 high, in the case of this building in Philadelphia, they were going to come crashing through to the floor below. And they only had a very limited space, so they couldn't spread them out. It was like walking up to a bleeding man, gushing blood on the street and saying, hi, we have this super deluxe Band-Aid that will stop that bleeding in 30 seconds. He's not going to ask you how much it costs or what's the packaging look like or what's your value proposition. You say, fine, give it to me. You need to be relentless about trying hard as you can to find that kind of excitement, because that's the difference between a great payoff at the end of 5 years, or at the end of 5 years having the opportunity to do your next startup. In fact, I told you about Steve's startup number 8. Startup number as successful and incredible as number 8 was. Startup number 7 was a company called Rocket Science Games. Anybody ever hear of Rocket Science Games? One guy was on the cover of Wired magazine. It was supposed to be, and this was, like early 90s. All-star team of marketers, salespeople, developers, technologists, finance people, world-class VCs, $35 million raised in the A round. Wired magazine, press all over the world. Wow, this is going to be the next great computer game company. And it was only memorable for one reason. It blew through $35 million in venture capital in world record time, was out of business in less than 2 years, selling off the furniture and so forth. Why? All those blue ribbon people I'm talking about on the A-list on the founders team, no gamers. So they built these whiz-bang super tech games, but the games sucked. The customer said, I'm glad for all the technology, but the play is wrong and the characters are no good, so I'm not buying it. And they filled several landfills with the unsold cartridges at the time along the way. So getting that match between customer and value proposition, I would encourage you, no matter what the Cynthia's calendar says, spend a month, spend 6 weeks making sure you have confidence in this idea of product market fit. Then you get to some of the easier things like, where should I sell this? Do I sell it online? Am I going to try to sell it at Walmart or Costco? Does it need to be in 7-Elevens or whatever? And how are people going to find me? Osterwalder, being a PhD professorial type, and Steve and I barely getting through college, have different attitudes about things, I guess you would say. And we said Alex's idea was that customer relationships was how do you cuddle them and why do they love you? And we said, no. There are 3 things that every company has to do to stay alive. Get customers, keep them, and grow them, right? Grow them 2 ways, getting them to spend more money with you, and more important today with the high costs of customer acquisition, getting them to getting them so enthusiastic that they refer other customers to you. So customer relationships is all about that arc of get, keep, and grow. And so this is what I'm going to ask you to play with at lunch. And if you can get to one more place, which sure is eventually important, how would the money work? If I spend $20 to acquire an active customer and I'm charging them $100, I'm probably in good shape. If I'm charging them $10, I'm probably dead. If I can't find customers the way I thought on AdWords or banner ads or handing out flyers in Washington Square Park, what am I going to replace that get customers strategy with in order to make sure that there's some money in the cash register later? And so these boxes all sort of come together in the business model for your business, and you'll get to experiment with that some at lunch and hopefully more over the next couple of weeks. But what you have to realize is when you finish your business model canvas, all you really have, right? NYU, what is it, $100,000 a year business school? So we call them hypotheses. It makes your parents feel much better, or your bank, a big college word. Really what you have is a bunch of guesses, right? Well, we guess that customers are going to discover us on AdWords, or we guess that they're really going to like this about our product, or we guess that our customers are little old ladies with lots of money in the bank. Okay, that's great. You got all these wonderful guesses. Sometimes you can actually get investors to put money behind your guesses. That's getting harder and harder, and we believe, or personal belief, it's going to be even harder in the new year as you have some of the glamour, stories of the last year or two really having trouble, right? Like Facebook and Zynga and Groupon, are really struggling sort of in the public markets. Our guesses don't matter at all, right? It's just what we tell each other around the conference table, but it has no bearing on reality. Usually the guesses that win the debate over what goes in which box are either the CEO's guess or the big investor's guess sitting around the table. It's sort of, you're playing business card bingo, biggest business card gets to scribble in the box, right? But you need to take that set of guesses and say, okay, we're kind of convinced that this feels good to us. What do we do now? What do we do now? How do we see if any of this is reality, or is it just the same sort of fairy tale fiction that, we used to write in a 55-page business plan. Now we can do it on a single page instead. Think of how much paper, toner, and time we just saved. And this is where the business model canvas process fundamentally ends. It becomes the foundation for your customer development. Get out of the building and let the customers tell you whether your guesses are fact or fiction, right? And so